Hello, everyone. Welcome back to those who have been joining us for the last 2 weeks, and welcome to those who've just joined on our webinar series, Embracing Change. As we all cocoon in our respective homes, depending on how the authorities have decided what is the best for us in terms of physical distancing and keeping this experience with minimum damage, our children have been asked to homeschool, which, just like all of us who have learned to work from home and are leading with impact, which is something that Graham will touch upon on May 13th, the children have learned to work and study from home, an experience they've also never had, just like many of us haven't in terms of working mainly from home. So as hundreds of millions of students do this, we as parents have an additional pressure at times, depending on how many hours of work they're actually being given online, while some actually don't have online classes and are just being given homework for a couple hours a day. So today we have the honor and privilege to welcome back Danette, who's part of our core team, to share with us how we can improve the homeschooling experience for our children. Welcome, Danette.
Thank you, Faisal. And it's good evening for me because it's 6 o'clock, and if you can see behind me, it's pitch black outside in Australia. I know for some of you it's morning, and some of you it's sort of the middle of the day, but welcome everyone. For those of you who haven't met me before, just a little bit about myself and why I'm teaching this particular or running this particular webinar. So my husband and I have been running a training company for the last 21 years. We partner with Faisal in Geneticare, and we've raised 5 children through that, as well as trained a number of children, particularly those that were going through exam stresses and stuff like that. Part of this is also really personal to me. When I was younger, I didn't think I was particularly good at maths, for argument's sake. And for a long time, the language I used stopped me from being as good at it as I could have been. Nowadays, I teach accountants finance. I teach board members how to read financial statements. And one of the things I learned is that how I was learning at school didn't necessarily work for me. So that sent me on a whole journey of learning about how do we make the learning experience something that's positive for everyone. So for me, this is something I'm really passionate about. And I'm going to encourage you today to use the chat box. I'm a person who loves that interaction. It gives me energy. So if you've got questions, feel free to wiggle your mouse and you'll find a toolbar from Zoom, and it's got 3 dots with more. If you click on that, it's got the chat box just below the more, and that allows you to chat either with us as the panelists or all panelists and attendees. So I encourage you to participate. The more engaged you are, the more engaged I'm going to be, and it'll just be fun for all of us. What are we going to be looking at today? We're going to be looking at, well, what does create an engaged learner? What are the secrets to getting our children engaged and excited about what they're learning? Looking at the different ways children learn, and then how do we create focus and engagement for our children? So how do we get them to that state and be able to keep them there so they learn productively? And finally, how do we design the whole positive homeschooling experience for our children when they're going through, as Faisal said, a whole stack of disruption, just like we are as adults? It's even more difficult, I think, for kids sometimes to understand. And I know for a lot of kids, they were excited when it was first, you'll be doing stuff from home. But one of the things we're noticing is that kids are missing that social interaction with their friends. And we're going to talk about that because that's actually an essential element of learning. So I love this quote. And this is something for us as parents, carers, grandparents to remember, that if a child cannot learn in the way that we teach, we must learn in a way the child can learn. And I'm going to come back to this when we talk about children's learning preferences. Just because you learn in a particular way does not necessarily mean that your child or your children will necessarily learn that same way. And it's not that they're not smart or anything. It's just that they may have a very different preference. So I'd love for you to share, let's get this chat box happening, where you're coming in from today. So which city, town, etc. And I'm going to start it in the chat box as well, because I live on a farm in Australia. And my nearest neighbour is 2 kilometres away. So my closest visitors this week have been 3 kangaroos who came hopping past our paddock yesterday twice. Excellent. Welcome, Eddie. Eddie's coming in from Hong Kong. I love it. Thank you for this interaction. It's beautiful. Thank you, Charles. You're in Hong Kong as well. Lovely. Felicia, you're in Singapore. Alexandra, you're based island of Cyprus. Wow. You're not allowed to go out at all. Wow. And have a 6-year-old. Gee, that's a bit of a challenge, isn't it? Bali, Dubai, welcome. New Zealand. Oh, I love it. Canberra. Oh, how fabulous. Geraldine's between France and Monaco, and Baku. Oh, wow. How amazing. Dubai. Oh, this is awesome. All over the place. Antwerp. How beautiful. Thank you, everyone. And Indonesia. Wow. Well, welcome. And I can't wait to share, and I will also encourage you to share as we go throughout this. So let's start with, in the chat box, what are some of the challenges that you may be currently experiencing around the whole homeschooling experience for your child or children? In the chat box, what are some of those challenges? And while you do that, I'm just going to hydrate because I am a bit thirsty. Yes, that's a common one. Yeah, thank you, Emma. Lack of focus. And it is something that we do expect given all the disruption that's happening. Thank you, Charles. Short concentration span, working from home as well as helping 7-year-olds to learn online. Beautiful. Keeping my son on top of his homework. Yes. They ask questions every 5 minutes. Yes, they're interested. They want to know stuff and they want to see that they matter as well. Juggling work and supervising kids and keeping consistent routine. Beautiful. Okay. We're going to address all of these, the discipline as well. Thank you, Eddie. Because part of making homeschooling work for kids is we need some sort of routine, but we also need a little bit of flexibility in that. I'm going to explain why in a minute. Yeah, and so true. Lots of computer and online time leading to eye strain. Wow. Okay, so we'll definitely come back to that one too. Thank you. So let's talk about some of the latest brain science. And this is really important because when we understand this, we can work with our brain and also our child's brain to help them to be able to concentrate and focus better, but also recognise when it's time for a break. For example, we know that when the parent is calm, the child is going to learn better. So the moment we as adults start to get frustrated with our children, what happens is their blood flow in their brain is diverted from the part of the brain that does the thinking, the prefrontal cortex, because they detect a bit of a threat. So it goes to the survival mechanism where they do the fight, flight, freeze, and afterwards flock, which is the 4 ways we respond to stress. So when we are calm, our children pick that up through their mirror neurons and it keeps them calm. What that means is more blood flow is here at the front of the brain, which makes it easier for them to be able to concentrate, to be able to take in information and to make new connections. And I'll come back to that shortly. So would you like a hack that can increase your brain's productivity by up to 31% and the same for your children? If you would like that, put a yes in the chat box. Yes. Who wouldn't, hey? So it is, oh, I love it. Love this interaction. Everyone do a party dance. I want you to celebrate the fact that you're engaging because it makes it so much fun for me. And this is what learning is really about. It is being engaged. So the hack to get up to 31% increase in productivity in our brain is this. Hope you can see, I'm smiling. When the parent smiles, it sends a signal to the child, everything's good. and they relax. And when they relax, they work with their brain much, much better than when we're doing frowning, scowling, frustrated, breathing, all those sort of things. So one of the fastest ways to get our kids in a beautiful space, and yes, it is possible, I love that, is that we center ourselves, we get ourselves calm before we go anywhere near the schoolwork, before we sit down with them to talk about their day, what they're going to be learning. When we smile, we relax, and that is contagious, and it helps our children learn much better. So much better than when I was at school, where everyone was concentrating, frowning, and what we didn't realise was that was working against our brain. Some beautiful things you can do with your children is, we all like a sense of autonomy. None of us like to be told what to do. This past weekend I saw two of my neighbours' children, and they're only very young. One's 3.5, one's 18 months. And they were getting a bit tired. They were going to go home very shortly. And one of them the youngest one started, I don't want to do that. And I said, oh, well, you could do this or you could do this. Because I knew that when I give a child or an adult a choice, I give them a sense of autonomy. And that is much better than someone telling someone what to do. So giving them no choice at all. So with children, if we sit down at the beginning of the day and we go, okay, what are the things you need to cover today and what order would you like to put them in? That gives them a sense of autonomy, versus if we say, well, this is what your day is going to look like. That will, in their brain, represent a threat, and that threat will make them less likely to want to engage in the learning. If your child is quite visual, getting them to use colour coding for the different lessons they're going to be doing can be a beautiful way, and they can arrange that colours in the order that works for them. That helps them become more engaged and feel more controlled, or they feel like they have more control around their learning. The other thing is, I bet some of you have children who are up bright and early, like this, super early, and others of you will have children that are like first thing in the morning. It is important to work with our children's body clock. So we know there's been some research done about high school children, that schools that delay the start time by about an hour, because our teenagers tend to go to bed late, and then by the time they get up, if they haven't had enough sleep, they're a bit... So when schools have started later with teenagers, what they've found is their academic scores have gone up, because the child's been able to get a good night's sleep, which has allowed them to work with their brain. We also know that exercise first thing in the morning is really important to help the blood flow, to help the children concentrate well. There's a fabulous book, we'll refer to it. I've got a lot of resources at the end that we're going to be sharing via email. This book's called Spark, by Dr. John Ratey. And what that book talks about is a study where they took children from low socioeconomic schools in a particular part of the States, and the only thing they changed was that they put some exercise in before the start of the day. What that led to is higher academic performance, not just on the state level, but also on an international level, which is a pretty amazing result. So exercise and movement we're going to talk about a little bit later, because that really works to help embed, help the learning for our children. So one of the things that we can put throughout the day is regular breaks, and also build in a sense of fun. I know a really good classroom, there's kids enjoying themselves, there's laughter. Again, some children will like quiet learning, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But when you see a child learn, when there's laughter, they tend to remember what it is they're learning. So fun. So if we're frowning, it's not going to be fun for them. The other thing that is so important, particularly at the moment, is your children are probably missing some of that social connection with their friends. So I would encourage during some of the breaks or during some of the lessons, if at all possible, to allow them to connect with their friends from school. what that'll allow them to do is get that social connection. And it's one of the things that is critical for our mental health and well-being. So where we're not able to see each other face to face, being able to use tools such as Zoom, as we're using at the moment, Skype, Facebook, FaceTime, all of those allow the kids to see each other and feel connected again. Now, this is different to social media. So I'm not encouraging the kids to get on social media during the break, because then they get distracted and it's not a good break. What I've noticed is, and what we know is, that using tools that allow that visual is really important. However, social media, not as good. So if they can use Zoom, Skype, etc., give them some time for those social connections. The last thing, or two last things I'd say on this slide: when they get something, when they learn something, celebrate it with them. So do the party dance or the high five or whatever works to go, you know what, you put in that effort, that's awesome that you've got that concept. Because again, that puts the feel-good chemicals into their bloodstream, the dopamine, the serotonin, etc., which will make them want to do that again. It'll make them want to learn again. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about is their learning spaces. So we now know that children exposed to different learning spaces will learn better than if they're just in one space. So your child might only have one room, but learning in different parts of that room and setting the room up for different subjects helps them embed that learning better, because there's variety. And one of the ways information gets to our prefrontal cortex, which is where we learn, is if it's new or it's interesting or it's personal. So where we move, we have variety, which makes it interesting. If we're doing everything the same, our brain goes boring, too hard, don't want to learn that particular stuff. And you would, I bet, if you were bored at school, I want you to use the chat box now. If you were bored at school, do you remember really what you were learning, or did you just switch off? So if you remembered, right, remembered. If you switched off, right, switched off. How did you find it when stuff was boring at school? Doodly, I love it. Thank you, Farah. Switched off, beautiful, yes. Switched off, which made you tired. And that's actually true, because it's using too much energy. Disengaged, thank you, switched off. Everyone's sleepy, hungry, doodling, switch off. We all did it, and this is what our kids do too. So that variety helps keep their brain interested, and I'll come back to that shortly. Now, the next slide comes from Carol Dweck, who wrote a book called Mindset, and she talked about there's two types of mindset, and we can change from one to the other. The first one is a fixed mindset, and we were probably messaged this a lot when we were children until this research was done. And we did this with our children until we learned about this. When our children would do well, we would go, oh, you're so smart. In fact, what that does is create a fixed mindset, because what the child does is associate them being able to do something pretty easily with them being smart. So if they try something that they don't get quickly, if we message based on intellect, they'll tend to quit doing the things that challenge them, and they have to put a bit more effort. What Carol Dweck suggests is that we use better phrasing and focus the children on the fact that their learning requires effort. So when a child does well, we message, you must have worked hard. So we're focusing on that beautiful effort that they're putting in. And where they don't, or they haven't quite got what they're learning, you say, oh, that's okay, you haven't got this yet. And that word yet gives them the encouragement to continue to put the effort in. And I know it's a beautiful phrase because it's far less threatening, because when kids don't get stuff and they relate their achievements to their IQ, they start to talk to themselves like they're, you know, oh, I'm dumb, how stupid am I, etc., which is really not good languaging. It's just that they haven't quite put enough effort in yet. So it's a lovely turn of phrase. Now, one of the things that I wanted to share with you, and this comes from a book, and I'll just show you that book. It came out recently this year. It's called How We Learn, and it's about the new science around education. What we're going to do at the end of the webinar is you're going to receive 6 weeks worth of emails, so one day a week, with a short video or an attachment. And one of the things we're going to do is provide you with more detail about these 4 pillars and things that you can do as an adult to encourage your child in relation to being an active learner and interested in their learning. So it's a great book, highly encourage it, and it is in the resources part of the end of the slides. So the first thing, if we want to create a child who is going to learn, is to capture their attention. So it's, what is it that we need them to focus their attention on? And there are some simple things to do. So obviously removing distractions can help. Ensuring that they're not multitasking, because when we multitask, we drain the brain's energy really quickly, and we're not actually designed to do that. Our brain switches tasks, which means they will become tired faster and they will struggle to concentrate. Work with your children's attention span. So your children, younger children will tend to have less of an attention span than an older child. When a child starts to get a bit restless, notice I'm doing the actions here, a bit squirmy, perhaps they're reading or watching something and they're just not quite getting it, or they're getting the eye strain that we talked about before, that's usually our brain's signal that it needs a break in order to refresh and to be able to come back and focus. So we'll talk a little bit later about those breaks. Another beautiful thing we can do as parents and carers is a simple thing. So our children look to us in terms of what do we focus on. So if there is, say, a book that we need them to read, so I'm going to use my book here. If I first look at my child, so notice I'm looking at you in the camera, and once I've got your attention, I then look at what it is I need them to focus on. Our children's eyes will naturally go to that. When they get it right, if I give them a thumbs up, if that's good, or a high five, it allows them to give their attention to where we want it to be. That's why having multiple devices in their room is not a good thing, because it's for them to get distracted. So create an environment that encourages that attention. The other thing is to teach your children to be a critical thinker, to test the hypothesis that they're learning. Get them to ask questions. Okay, what do I know? What don't I know? What don't I agree with? And get them to think about, okay, how can I prove this right or wrong? That'll keep their attention. So that's the first step, or the first pillar. The second one is active engagement. We know that when we are passive, we zone out. For example, if I talk too long, notice I paused, and you're not doing anything, your brain will start to wander, which is why we're using the chat box today. So active engagement requires the children to participate in the learning. What we know is that if a child is able to, say we're learning about gravity, if I, as the parent or the teacher, say, look, I've got this ball and I'm going to teach you about gravity, they're not going to learn as effectively as if I hand my child the ball and then ask them to learn a few things and come back to me and tell me what they learn about gravity. When they are actively involved with objects, etc., they will learn faster. The other thing is laughter, fun, can keep them actively engaged. When we laugh, we get those feel-good chemicals, they want to learn more. So tell them, say to them, okay, practice with this, learn about gravity, and come and tell me a couple of really funny things you learned about gravity. And you'll be amazed how much more actively they want to be engaged versus, okay, you've got to say your times table over and over again. A friend of mine had a child who really wasn't getting their times table. Their child was a really active learner. So what they did is they kicked a football, and every time they kicked the football, the child either had to answer a times table or their parent had to answer. And they learned the times table far better by being active than just a passive learner. Now, I know you can't necessarily go outside and kick footballs, etc., but inside, what things can you use to encourage that active engagement in learning? The other thing is, when something is curious, the brain pays attention. When it's boring, it does not. So again, what sort of fun facts, what curious things can they share with you about what they're learning? Now, one of the things we also know, the third step is around error feedback. And this is where I predict when I learn this, this is going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, my brain pays attention, like, okay, I've missed something. And so we want to go back and learn from those errors. In fact, the best way to learn is to make those mistakes and then go, okay, now I understand why that didn't work. I'll try this. So whenever we don't get it right the first time, that's okay. It's just part of the learning process and it's a natural part. Please don't judge the child. Just ask questions, remain curious to encourage them to continuously learn, because then they'll be curious for the rest of their lives. And in the disruption we have at the moment, we need that curiosity, and our children will definitely need it moving forward. The final bit is consolidation. And this particular bit is that in order to get good and to embed information in our brain, we do have to practice it. So it is letting our kids know we do need to practice, but they can practice in different ways. It is also why sleep is so important, because when our children sleep, it allows their brains to make connections from the learnings they had that day. When children don't get enough sleep, they will struggle the next day to recall information, and they certainly won't be able to hold it longer term. So helping them to get a good night's rest is really, really important. The other thing is work with their body clock to help on that as well. Now, as I said, we'll send you a whole stack more information about this, but they're just some simple strategies you can do to support your child through those 4 pillars of learning, to make them a child that is curious, that in a lot of ways leads their own learning because they're excited to share with you what they've learned. And we as parents, and carers, if we can be engaged, then our kids will want to come and share stuff with us. Now, we all learn differently. So I'm curious, in the chat box, what's your preferred way of learning? Are you more visual? Are you more auditory, more logical, more tactile, more creative? In the chat box, please share how you prefer to learn. Thank you, Charles. Creative and visual, logical and creative. Oh, that's a nice mixture. Visual and tactile, beautiful visual. Visual and auditory, fabulous. Oh, I love this. And I love this awareness through experience. Thank you, Farah. Visual and logical, fabulous. Another visual and logical, visual and audio. No personal preference. Interesting, Victor. That's great, which means you can use all of them. Creative. Thank you, Rafiq. Audio and logical, beautiful. So what did you notice about those answers? Are we all the same or are we different? In the chat box, were we all the same or were we different? Yeah, all different. So this is something to remember when we are teaching our children or helping them to learn, that our preferred approach may not be our children. I love it. Everyone's putting different in now. If you are trying to teach your child and they are struggling to learn the way you are teaching, I'll go back to that earlier quote around if it's not working for our children, we need to change how we teach them. So one of the things we'll be sending you is a number of resources about how you can use different tools for, say, a visual learner versus an auditory, and just some quick ideas. So my visuals and my tactiles or kinesthetics love things like, can you see the post-it notes, the sticky tabs? I bought a whole stack of props today. Highlighters, coloured pens, for argument's sake. They'll work really well with those type of learners. For my creatives as well, they'll love those colours. For my auditories, if I've got an introverted auditory learner, the child will often want a really quiet space. Now, that may not be possible with everyone at home. If that's the case, giving them noise cancelling headset so that they can sit in their own little world and work their way through what they're learning. So a visual learner will often like to watch or read things, and auditory will be much more about listening to things. Two of my children are auditory, so we've got 5 children, my husband and I, between us. One of my children is an extroverted auditory. So when she was going through year 12, I would make sure when she came home from school, we would discuss what she learned. So we'd speak about it, and then we'd talk through what she was going to do on particular assignments. And she loved that because she would then go away and do the work that she needed to do because she was auditory, but then very tactile. One of my other children, he was auditory, much more introverted. So for him, quiet space was really, really important. And one of the ways he loved to learn to spell, because he was quite auditory, is he would sing songs spelling out words. So more complicated words for auditory kids, beautiful ways to sing them. If a child's a bit more tactile, they could sing them and have a bit of movement too, and they could learn to pick up those concepts faster. Now, in this short period of time, we can't cover lots of strategies, but as I said, we will send you a whole stack of resources to support the different types of learners. The other thing I would say is with your logical learners, they will like something that's got a bit more structure and has a goal-orientated outcome. That will be different if your child's a bit more creative. They'll like things like mind maps, etc. And they will be okay with something that's a bit more open-ended and they interpret it to work out what the end result needs to be. So encourage those different preferences in your children. They're not right or wrong, they're just your child's preference. If we work with it, you can increase their academic performance quite dramatically. One of our children didn't get their teacher's style at all, was really struggling when she was in year 11. We went and spoke to the teacher, worked out the teacher's approach, and then translated it to our daughter's preference. And the teacher had said to us, "We think your daughter is at the top of her grade for this." We went, okay, went and translated it for our daughter, and her marks went up 20% overnight. And she maintained that all the way through to year 12. And at the end of the year 12, met up with the teacher again and she went, okay, maybe I didn't assess your daughter quite right. So when your child is struggling, sometimes it might just be whether it's the teacher or whether it's your preference that is just different from theirs. So think about this if they do, if it's not quite working for them. Now here's a question for the chat box. What do you think increases focus by 30%, increases creativity and innovation by 46%, and health and well-being by, 48% for the innovation and creativity and 46% for health and well-being? In the chat box, have a guess at what that might be. Oh, I love that. Oh, I love the fast thing. PE, music, it's all part of this. Good night's sleep, absolutely. Any other ideas? I love the fact, having fun, oh, I love that. Sleep, exercise, beautiful. Oh, I love this, everyone. Do you know what? Meditation, music, oh, everyone do this. Oh, I'm loving this engagement. No judgment, breathing and meditation, music. Oh, I love this, everyone. Do you know what it is? It's actually taking breaks. So all of the things you suggested are part of what we would do on those breaks. Some of the things we know about breaks are that breaks are where our brain does the hard lifting. So when a child is really concentrating, there's only so much bandwidth that this part of our brain can take. And so when we get a little bit distracted, it's our brain saying, please take a break so I can do the heavy lifting, work out where it needs to be sorted in the brain. And it helps the child come back with a fresh mind to be able to focus again. We also know that breaks, particularly when we're doing things like exercise, moving around, bit of meditation, etc., allows us to boost our energy in a beautiful way. It definitely helps increase their focus and productivity. And the beautiful thing about breaks is because if we're moving, it allows us to reduce our stress. So one of my parents that I was dealing with recently, she said that in her break from her work, her and her daughter would sit and do yoga. I know another parent who does this with their child. So every hour, the alarm goes off and the alarm looks like this. A clock, not a phone. Because with the phones, not good. Phones, we look at too much. Good question here. Thank you. what happens if break time is longer than studying? Sometimes that's okay, because maybe what they're learning, they need time to go away and digest. So keep an eye on it. If they're concentrating really well and then their brain says time for a break, and it's the break, they take a bit longer, but they come back and they're better in terms of their focus, then that is probably okay. Now, if it's that they're bored or they're struggling with what they're learning, I'd go back to their learning preferences, look at some of the activities in terms of the 4 pillars. And also, we're going to talk about food and stuff in a minute, because it could also be what they're eating. So yes, 90 minutes is about for an adult, but if it's a child, depending on the age of the child, it could be a lot shorter. And I'm happy to come back to that when we get to the end as well. Hopefully that was helpful. So simple things to create focus and engagement for us. We've talked about most of these. The movement thing is so important. And Charles, I'm going to come back to yours in a second, because that's actually a really good point. Some of the things I haven't talked about. So we talked about sleep. I would also encourage you, if your children are getting a bit lethargic in the afternoon, naps can be really helpful. Again, because it's allowing the brain to do the heavy lifting. Where you can get outside, vitamin D is really important. And just nature is really good at calming us and calming our children. There's also so much to be learnt in nature. So learning in nature is really good. If you can't get outside, having a picture or having a window that looks out at nature, or playing a video from, say, YouTube, which shows a nature meditation, again, will calm children. We've talked about the social media and the food hydration. So I'm going to come to Charles's question. What happens if we're teaching toddlers 2.5 to 3 years old? Most of it, Charles, will be play, and they will often have a shorter attention span. So we have to think about, okay, what are the different things we want to teach them, and what are the variety of ways we can do it? So when I said our neighbours' children were over here on the weekend, I had planned before they arrived a number of different activities involving different things that I could be teaching them. So we spent a little bit of time cooking. We went and played some music. We did a little bit of reading. I knew that their attention span was around about 15 to 20 minutes. So I had activities with a couple of breaks outside to sort of help them digest that information. And the most important thing is, when I started to see them getting a little bit laggy and a bit tired, we just sat and had a little bit of quiet time, and they had some food, some nice healthy food. And then when I could see their energy coming back up, off we went and we moved again. So kids, when they're younger, it's about the exploration. It's about having fun. Hopefully that was a little bit helpful. And again, I'm happy to add some more at the end. So in terms of making this experience positive for our children, as much as we possibly can, look to use their learning preferences to support their learning. Ensure that there is movement throughout the day, and that we involve more than just the normal, the 1 or 2 senses. So make it multi-sensory, particularly if you've got children who are quite tactile, having things that they can be playing with. For example, if you've got a really tactile child, having one of these squishy balls can actually help them listen and learn much more effectively than if we say to them, sit still and be quiet. Now, an auditory introverted learner will happily sit still and be quiet. A tactile child, however, will be moving. And historically, what we used to say to those children is sit still, be quiet, and they get in trouble for movement. But movement is part of how they learn. So if you do have a child who's a mover, give them stuff, different senses, in order for them to be able to take in information. And others I've already spoken about, so I don't think I need to go through them again. Some of the things about their learning space is make sure, and I'm sure Faisal will comment because we've had this conversation before, check out their learning space in terms of, is it good for their work health or their health and safety? So is the screen at the right level? Is their chair comfortable? Do they have the ability to, if they can, stand up and sit down, not sit down all day? Can they have a variety of areas where they're doing the learning? Because again, that creates that interest in the brain which is more likely to take in those different bits of information if it takes parts in different parts of our house. As much as possible, we also need to make sure that that movement is there. Again, if they're getting restless or they're getting tired, it is a pretty good indicator it's time to get up and move. If they are watching something or reading something or listening to something and you can see the glazed eye happening, that is absolutely a time to say, okay, let's hop up, let's move, and let's stretch. Remember that these times are challenging for us as adults. They're more challenging for our children because we've had some life experience. For our kids, they haven't necessarily. All of a sudden, one day their world was like this, the next day it was like this. The more we can make it relaxed and fun, the easier it's going to be for them to actually learn really well. So some of the things to know about our brain is it eats regularly whether we do or not. So for your children, feeding them every couple of hours is really important. My husband and I, so we live on a farm 2.5 kilometres from our nearest neighbour. And when our children were growing up, we would regularly have up to 15 to 20 children, and just Graham and I looking after 15 to 20 children. And one of the secrets we found of keeping our children focused and happy and not fighting with one another was to make sure that they ate healthy food every 2 to 3 hours. So they were grazing throughout the day, which allowed their blood sugar to be nice and even. So nutritious food such as nuts, if they're not allergic, seeds, fruit, vegetables, hummus is really good for brain food as well. And as much as possible, low and most preferable, no sugar in their snacks and food. What we see with sugar is that the children get the brain, the spike of energy, and then they get the drop in energy. And the younger they are, the more emotional they will become, which will make them difficult to learn. There's also a lot of studies that now show high sugar consumption in countries. So the countries with the highest sugar consumption also have the highest depression rates. What we know is that when we have sugar, it keeps us in the fight or flight part of our brain longer than if we have those beautiful, nutritious, natural snacks. The other thing that is so important is hydration. Our brain and our body is so much of it is water. The water allows our brain to work more effectively. If you're living in an environment with lots of air conditioning, your children, if they've got chapped lips, are already dehydrated. So they're working harder with their brain to learn stuff. So more, regular water is really, really important. And we can role model that ourselves. I think that's really important. If we're snacking on healthy food and our children and we're drinking lots of water, we're also encouraging that in our children. Okay, so I think given the time, I wanted to give you some time for questions, but I am really curious, what are some of the things that you might do differently now that we've gone through some of these strategies, and why is that important to you? So in the chat box, I'd love for you to share, what are you going to do slightly differently moving forward? And I'm going to have a water while you put your answers in there. Oh, I love that. Thank you, Alexandra. Smile more, try not to get annoyed, and take breaks. That's beautiful. It's Yang. Smile when coaching the kids. Oh, isn't this beautiful? And you're going to feel great too. The beautiful thing about the smiles, it's win-win. I love that. Any other things that people are going to do? Listen to their body language. That's fabulous. Thanks, Shoda. Encourage my son to move around within the room as he learns for change. That's beautiful. Need to find toddlers' learning style. Beautiful. And so one of the things we can do with the learning style when they're young is to notice, are they paying more attention to, say, books and videos, which will mean they're more visual, or perhaps are they listening more, or are they just those exploratory children who love to learn? Do they love Lego, which means they're probably a little bit more logical, or do they prefer art and craft? Again, they're just simple ways we can pick up their preferences. So I love that, Charles, that you're going to explore that. And maybe set up a room to allow more movement in the day and not worry when they swing on the chairs. Yes, as long as they're safe swinging on the chairs, yeah, because they're moving. Golly, thank you. Focus on breaks. Do nothing for most. Yeah, that's beautiful. Take more breaks. I love it. More breaks, excellent. The learning styles, more healthy snacks. Oh, I love that. And keeping hydrated, beautiful, as well as those healthy foods. One of the things I found, particularly when I'm dealing with children in year 12, is that when you explain that things like hummus and carrot sticks actually help them embed learning much faster, and seeds and nuts, etc., if they're not allergic to the nuts, help them learn far better, the year 12 kids actually start to associate. And you say, this is brain food. And they go, oh, I need some brain food. So part of it's our messaging as well. And I love that, Charles. It's so important. Yeah, more breaks for the parents. Have those breaks when you're with the kids. Have fun, because you know what? Our children, while it seems at the moment that, you know, there's a lot going on, we only have our children for a short period of time in our life. And so to be able to spend this time connecting with them, helping them to develop a love of learning, is one of the greatest gifts you can give your child. My grandmother taught me, and I still remember, my grandmother's been dead 25 years, but my grandmother taught me at 3 to read books. So I was able to read full books at 3 because she loved to read, and she was so devoted to teaching me to read. What a beautiful gift, because that's created a life that's allowed me to create a beautiful life with my husband for our children and our grandchild. What a beautiful privilege we've all got at the moment to be able to do that. So those breaks are essential for us and essential for our children. Now, I'm going to open it up to Q&A. What more questions do you have around what we've discussed tonight? Or today for you, it's tonight for me. Feel free to use the chat box. That would be beautiful. Doesn't look like we've got any.
Well, Danette, while we wait for everybody to type in whatever they're thinking about, I mean, I think on the discipline side, right, and people keep talking about timing and discipline. As it is, I think there's already enough pressure with the change that's occurring due to not only the online experience, but to the limitations of whether it be movement, whether it be connection with their friends. Maybe you want to highlight a more, to understand what that really means in terms of day-to-day. Routine is good, and discipline to an extent needs to be a little softer, I think, than what many of us have in mind. Maybe you want to share a little bit on that as we see so many questions coming in.
Yes, and absolutely. So having structure is important. Having flexibility within that structure to read where the child's at, to read where you're also at. So some days you're going to have a bad day, and maybe the best outcome for you and the child or the children is that today is a break day. And then tomorrow we start back with the school day, because not every day is going to work. We do need that variety. And at the moment, as Faisal said, that flexibility, that softness is actually more important, because what we want to do is encourage them to want to learn, not discourage them because we're frustrated, etc. So Alexandra asked a question, how can we grab the child's initial attention? So what's the first thing he or she says, how boring? Okay, so what you say to your child is, I want you to find something that's really interesting about this topic, or I bet you can't find something interesting about this. So we make it a bit of a game. Again, if they're quite visual, you go, you know what, I found this great book, or I found a really interesting YouTube video. If they're visual, there's 3 things that I didn't know. I want you to see if you can find out what they are. One of the things we did with our children when they were growing up and they used to say they were bored, and this gets them away from the term boring pretty fast, is we used to say to them, really? Okay, well, here's the vacuum cleaner. If you're bored, I can find lots of work for you to do. And all of a sudden they go, oh, no, I can go and find something more interesting. But I'd encourage them through questions to go on a learning journey for themselves. Okay, come back and tell me 3 things that you didn't know about this topic or that you think I wouldn't know. And kids like to show their parents stuff that the parents don't know. So that's a nice way. Hopefully that's a simple way. There will be more in the handouts we send through to you as well. When I mentioned the no or minimal social media, does that include WhatsApp or just Facebook? So WhatsApp we can use for the visual. So I would say if they're using WhatsApp to just do a conversation with their friends and a video with their friends, I think that's okay. Facebook, the thing is they get on that and they're not necessarily connecting with their friends as much as they're swiping through lots of information. And a lot of that information is not necessarily so positive at the moment. Whereas if they're on WhatsApp and they're talking to their friend via video, they can see each other and they're connected, which I think is really important. So yeah, WhatsApp I'd be okay with, not so much on Facebook, but FaceTime, yeah, absolutely. Is there a specific way to know how a child learns? Sometimes they think they learn one way, but maybe it's a combination. Often it is a combination. There's a number of free, what's the word? Not tests, but tools that you can use to get a pretty good idea of their preferences. I often say to kids, tell me about a teacher that you really enjoy their classes and how do they teach? And then tell me about a teacher that you don't really like and how do they teach differently? And that'll often get the child to think about what do they enjoy about that teacher versus this one. And it's not to say the teachers are good or bad, it's just the way they teach probably is quite different. So that can be a good way of exploring for the children if they're a little bit older. What are the things that work for them for learning and what don't? The information we'll send out to you has a whole stack of different approaches for the different learning preferences. Play around with them and notice which ones the children seem to take to more versus less. And if you get stuck, just reach out to us. Sure, we can, happy to talk more about it. Is there a recommended amount of ratio for work/play, in particular for home-based learning? It really does depend on the child. And what looks like work for one child could actually be play for another child. So when I was learning, I'm an introverted learner, and I used to love to just sit quietly and read and read and read. For my brother, that was like the most painful thing because my brother was really a movement child. And so what I thought of as fun, he thought of as work. So it really does depend on the child. And working with their body clock each day, it does depend on how much sleep they get. And also, is this a new concept? So if something's really new, our brain chews a lot more energy than if it's something they have some familiarity with. So if we can if it's something brand new that they've got to learn, try and relate it to something they already know. That gives them some ability to make connections faster than if it's completely brand new and they've got nothing like it in their life. For example, I teach government finance in Australia, so I'm a government finance expert, weirdly. And I know that most of the people I'm teaching have no idea about numbers and certainly don't understand government finance. So the way I teach the budget process is to draw a bucket, and I draw an arrow going in and an arrow going out. And I go, okay, how much money goes in? They go, oh, no idea. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Money goes in. Oh, money goes out. And I make it a really simple concept that they then get. And then I teach them the government words they use around that funding. And again, this for us as adults means we have to think about different ways of teaching concepts to them if they're struggling. Hopefully that answered your question, Cole. Charles, how to help toddlers concentrate, not running around during Zoom class? Maybe part of their thing is they are a very active learner. So can they perhaps be doing squats while the Zoom class is going on? Can they be doing maybe some little push-ups, depending on what they're like? That movement for them might be really important. Also, Charles, consider maybe getting something like a squishy ball where that can be part of their movement, because if they're moving this way, they might actually sit a little bit stiller because they're allowed to do that movement with their hand. So try that. And again, feel free to reach out and I can give you some other strategies as well. Next question. How relevant is the notion that a child sponges off the parent's structure, habits and attitudes, which creates an environment that is up to the parent to model behaviour that they would like to see? Our children absolutely pick up what we do, not what we say. For example, we know if you smoke and you say to your children, don't smoke, they're going to smoke because they're watching what you do rather than what you say. So if we're saying to our children, okay, children, you need to sit and concentrate, and we're doing this. I hope you can see my phone. On the phone, then jumping over the computer and jumping back and forth. We're teaching them not to focus. We're teaching them that it's okay to multitask. And if we tell them one thing, give them no choice in it, takes away their autonomy, they're going to push back. So really, we do need to be the role models to show them the good way to learn. And we need to show them the enjoyment of learning. And if it means that we need to come back to how do I learn to focus? How do I learn to smile and be calm? Then that's actually a really good reset for us as well. Another question, hopefully that helped too. Another question, what to do to minimise the use of social media, that's including Facebook, Instagram, as well as gaming? Have a conversation with your child. Come up with a thing that works for them and you. Explain why during the day it might be a distraction. However, you're okay with something like Zoom so they can connect with their friends. And then at the end of the day, when their brain's a little bit more fried, exhausted, then maybe that's the time for them to use some social media. Again, what are we role modelling? Are we role modelling being on social media all the time? Or when we finish the day, do we put our phone away and use that time to connect? Our kids follow what we do. So we need to be conscious of what we're up to as well. Thank you, Vanessa. Okay, Singapore, worry that after a week, we parents become stressed out again. It's a lot of work reminding yourself. Absolutely. And one of the beautiful things about this whole experience is I think it's a reminder for all of us that we need to look after ourselves. So when we look after ourselves, then we can serve others, including our children. If we don't do that, we become frustrated and it makes the whole situation worse for everyone. At the moment, it just is what it is. It's not good or bad, it is what it is. It is an opportunity for us to learn self-love, self-kindness, more patience, peace. And what I've learned over my lifetime is the things that I thought were bad, often in hindsight, taught me some valuable, valuable lessons. The things that I thought were good often turned out not to be so great. I think this time is a beautiful time to return to our centre, to remember what's really important. Forgive yourself if you do get a bit frustrated. Just notice where you're at, and that's usually a sign that it's time for a break for you. Do something that's fun, that looks after you as much as possible. Your self-care will help you serve your children and help them learn better and make the whole homeschooling experience so much better. Now, good question, Elizabeth. Would I recommend continuing with homeschooling after lockdown is lifted as a long-term option? It really does depend on your experience, whether it's worked for you and your children or your child. I'm not an expert in that area. I know my niece in America, she was homeschooled by her mum for quite some time, and now she's in a regular school, although now they're back to homeschooling till September. So it really does depend on what works for you and your children. Great question. Thank you. I find it challenging to work and help my 7-year-old daughter to study. I let her watch TV, play on phone during breaks so I can work. It seems to become a habit. How do you break it? Okay, so you're going to have to know that when that break happens, that maybe it's time to stop work and just sit with her, go outside for argument's sake, do something rather than just put her on the TV or the phone. Because TV and phone disrupt the brainwaves, it makes it harder for them to learn. And while it's a short-term solution, what you really want to do is perhaps use that time, even a couple of breaks during the day for connection, a bit of movement for both of you. So maybe you just start small. Instead of every break, one break, you get up and do a bit of movement with your daughter, perhaps. Or you go and eat a snack together, something like that. All of that, over time, just break it one little break at a time. Don't do it all in one go, otherwise your daughter will get completely disrupted, as will you. And at the end of the day, if one day it's all TV, etc. during the break, be gentle on yourself, because it's obviously been a big day for you too. Oh, I love that. So I want to do this. This is for Vanessa, because she just wanted to share that her and her kids have been sugar/candy free since last July, so 2019. Difference is amazing. Can't champion it enough. Oh, I love it. Thank you. And I know I'm on the hour, so I will keep speaking. But if you have to go, I completely understand, because I have one more question I can see there. If you do have to go, thank you so much for being on here. Faisal, did you want to say anything? But I will stay on and answer the other questions. But Faisal, I'll let you wrap up.
Go ahead.
Okay.
We'll wrap up, and then you can answer the question.
Yep. So in terms of, for all of you, just keep in mind we have a number of other webinars, and there's more than these coming up in the future. Faisal's doing a fabulous job, and Jing as well, and Jamie, of getting all of these webinars up to help people. So please, if you're interested, sign up for these. The other thing I just wanted to say is feel free to reach out either to myself or Faisal on these email addresses if you do have more questions. We really want to support parents to be able to move through this challenging time so that they're fully supported, so they can support their children as well. So if we can help in any way, please feel free to reach out. Thank you, Farah. That's a beautiful compliment. Okay, I'm just going to come back to the question. With multiple kids, 3 close in age, all at home, how to manage giving them equal attention, 100% attention from each perspective. So what I love about having more than one child is that you can actually get the kids to give each other attention. When we had 5 children at home, what we used to find is that the older ones would work with the littler ones, and then sometimes they would swap homework, for argument's sake, and learn off each other, and they would have fun together. So what I would do is actually, if you can, encourage them to teach each other a little bit. 1, because it's fun for them, and 2, it also takes a bit of pressure off you too. So try that. It doesn't always have to be you. There is also in the resources, we're going to send you a number of online organisations that do lessons around different things for free. For example, the Khan Academy is one of them. So there are times where it might be worth the child being on a computer, for argument's sake, learning about math, and someone else teaching them. So don't always feel that it has to be you 100% of the time. And that's why planning with your child, so you also have some idea of when you get a bit of a breather during the day, is so important. All right, looks like that's pretty much all of the questions. I hope I've answered them to the best that I could. I'm going to hand over to you, Faisal. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Danette. Really, really, what an incredible experience. Thank you. And I want to just remind what you said about the mirror neurons, right? That we should focus on our state of being in order to create the environment that we would like our kids to bathe in, because that's what they're bathing in, right? That,
yes.
Leading by example, like you said, 95% we all know is video and 5% is audio. And tomorrow, what a beautiful sequence. Tomorrow we have Dr. D, who's going to go through with us on meditation, on the beautiful privilege of journaling, on breathing exercises and different forms of movement that can really shift our state of being to be the best version of ourselves, in order to, like you said, initially start with self-care and self-love, but then look after for our loved ones. So thank you very much, Danette. Truly, I learned a lot. I'm going to go home and make a few changes to our day-to-day environment. And at the same time, thank you very much, everyone, for being here, for the valuable time and honor and privilege to serve. And see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.